Good morning. This is Jesse Marsden with the Microcredit Summit campaign. I'm here with my colleagues here at the campaign. I'm also here with several of our panelists this morning. Unmute them if you'd like. Welcome to the latest installment of the eWorkshop series. The Microcredit Summit campaign launched in 2013 a new project called the 100 Million Project, which works to build a movement among financial inclusion stakeholders to take specific, measurable, and time-bound action towards the end of poverty through campaign commitments. And this webinar series presents partners from organizations who have launched these campaign commitments and focused on providing access to new and innovative ways of working towards the end of poverty. Today we're co-hosting this e-workshop with Women's World Banking, who launched their campaign commitment in 2014. I'm pleased to say also that we have on with us Mike Krell, who is from MIX, who also launched a campaign commitment back in 2013. This workshop will focus on expanding the use of the gender performance indicators as a means to quantify your organization's progress on serving your women clients well. Jacqueline Burfond is Senior Associate for Research and Monitoring and Evaluation at Women's World Banking, where they have developed a set of 25 gender performance indicators to help institutions understand the core question of, are we serving women clients well? Mike Krell is the Analysis and Data Manager within the Social Performance Program at MIX, who partnered with Women's World Banking to develop the set of select 5 indicators from among the full range of 25, and we'll cover that in more detail very shortly. Shahina Sagar is the Network Branch Manager with MicroFund for Women based in Jordan, and we're very glad she's joining us from very far away this morning. And she'll be sharing with us the perspective of an institution using these indicators to support their clear focus on serving women clients well. Before I begin, I want to mention that we will be taking questions from the audience actually throughout the presentation. And what we mean by that is if you'll look to the right, you should see the question and answers section there, not the chat function, but actually the Q&A section. We would like you to submit your questions through that box. And if you would, direct them to one of the panelists called Alba Donis. She's here with the Microcredit Summit campaign. She'll be receiving all of your questions and combining them together and sending them over to me so that I can input them as we go along. And so we'll have a continual Q&A as we go throughout the hour. And so be sure you're sending your questions to Alba so that we make sure that we can get those worked into the presentation. So with that, we want to start today actually with a little participation. We want to ask you a poll question for everyone who's joined. So we're opening that poll now. You can see that the question is beyond percent women clients, how many of you are already tracking data by gender? And the responses there are yes, we are currently tracking gender disaggregated data, or no, but we'd like to start, or perhaps no, but we are thinking about it. So if you would, we're going to take a minute. Some of you are already responding, but go ahead and put your response there. That'll help us get a sense of who it is that's on with us today, and our presenters will be able to kind of gear their presentations more towards that. We'll give that about another minute or so, and then we'll start closing that down. We'll give it just another few seconds here for those of you who are currently working on answering. Be sure when you've selected your response, you hit submit in the bottom right. I should mention that. Great, and so we'll start the process of shutting that down. Great. Okay. And so we'll click to share the poll results. And so you can see there, it looks like about 25% of you are currently using gender disaggregated data. About 20% of you would like to, so that's great to know. We hope that throughout the presentation today, you'll be able to be introduced to that. So at this point, I want to turn to Jacqueline Burfond with Women's World Banking and just open by asking you, Jacqueline, first about whether you have any reactions to the poll question there and what that might tell us about those who are joining us today on the e-workshop.
Absolutely, and thank you, Jesse, for the great introduction. No, I think the poll results are really interesting, and quite frankly, what I would expect to hear. You know, I'm really happy to hear that a good percentage of the participants are already looking at gender disaggregated data, but I think more importantly, there are a lot that are not yet looking at their data this way, and I think that's where we hope we can convince you through this webinar about why it's so important for you as financial institutions to start looking at your data with a gender lens, if you will.
That's great. And so Women's World Banking has begun the Gender Performance Initiative that houses the development of the indicators. And I thought maybe we'd start by learning a little bit more about the initiative.
Sure. So just to introduce why we started this initiative, several years ago in about 2011, we first did a scan of all the mixed data out there, and we found that 74% of MFIs globally were claiming to target women as a target market, and over half of the MFIs declared women's empowerment or gender equality as an objective. Yet what we saw was that very few of these institutions, even within our own network, were really using data to measure how well they were serving these women clients. What we saw back then was the industry was tracking and still continues for the most part to track about 5 gender indicators. This included percent women borrowers as well as several gender diversity metrics for staff and management. But we saw that these indicators were really only telling a small part of the story. And so what we wanted to do was create a more robust measurement framework that would allow all of us, financial institutions and other stakeholders in the industry, to really hold ourselves accountable to these financial inclusion and empowerment principles that we are advocating. And this really launched the Gender Performance Initiative.
Great. Now, you mentioned as you were expanding, you mentioned that some of the original information that you had access to included things like staff management. As you expanded, what were some of the key areas that you're assessing with these indicators?
Absolutely, yeah. We really wanted to look beyond, and we were looking at a whole bunch of different areas, so we really categorized them into 3 main areas that we call client, institution, and outcomes. So first, looking at the client level, we really wanted to measure outreach to low-income women, and looking beyond percent women borrowers, how do you know you're reaching the right segments of women and really gaining a market share? We also wanted to look at whether products were designed and delivered to meet women's needs specifically. Were you assessing your women clients' needs and then adapting your product terms and conditions to meet those needs? The third thing we looked at under,
Sorry, go right ahead.
The third thing we looked at under the client area was the capacity of the institution to provide quality services to women specifically. And finally, we looked at protection of women clients. The SMART campaign has already really set the standard on assessing client protection. However, we felt that there were a few areas where there were specific women's needs that needed to be addressed and looked at, like transparency, communication, and confidentiality. At the institution level, the second area we looked at, this was really about the staff and management. And as you said, we are already, as an industry, tracking percent women staff, percent women managers, percent women board. But we really wanted to go beyond that and look at recruitment, retention, and promotion of women. Were institutions fostering an environment where women staff and leaders could thrive? Then the third area, which is perhaps the most interesting, was really around outcomes. We felt this was important to look at both from the financial institution perspective as well as from the women clients themselves. So from the institution perspective, the outcomes are really around building that business case for serving women. Are women a profitable segment? Are they loyal to financial institutions? But we also wanted to look at it from the social outcomes for the clients themselves. So, when we look at women clients, are they experiencing growth in their business income? Are they investing in improvements in their household or more likely to send their children to school? Of course, these are the most difficult to assess, but we really wanted these indicators to be aspirational as we push ourselves to better understand the social outcomes from the financial services we provide. So within these 3 areas, as you mentioned, there are about 25 indicators. Some of them have alternatives, but we don't think it's necessary to implement all of them at once. We more see this as an overarching framework of the areas where an institution can start to look at their gender performance.
Great. So you mentioned the business case, and I think that's very important to a lot of the people that are on the webinar today. If I'm a financial institution and I'm looking at these gender performance indicators and I'm trying to understand, once I have that data, how can I utilize that data in my everyday operations? Is there any thing that you can tell us about how the financial institutions can use this data?
And maybe starting with the business case, so working our way backwards, we really hear a lot in the industry that women are better repayers or women are more loyal. And so these indicators really allow you to test these assumptions as an institution. So for the business case, are women a profitable segment? Often it's not clear-cut, but you need to look at by product, by service that you offer to understand whether these ideas we have are true and how that informs your business strategy. Some other ways these indicators can be useful for an institution when we talk about outreach, for example. We talk a lot about reaching women, but are we reaching the low-income women segment? Or, and how do we measure that? Are we gaining market share in the market? So when you look at the scope of women in your country or in your region and say, am I reaching a tangible segment? These are just some indicators that will help you to get that type of data. And then one other example I could throw out there is really, through the business and operations of how you develop your products and services. We talk a lot about products that meet women's needs, but are you measuring how many women you're consulting through market research? Or are you looking at product uptake by gender, which will really give you more detailed information on whether women are valuing these products. And from a business perspective, absolutely you want to know if your products are resonating with certain segments so you can continue to target them and grow those products and services.
That's a pretty exhaustive list of potential uses. I think that's very interesting and going to be something that our audience is going to want to ask some questions about. I will remind you that we are standing by to take any questions as we go along. Feel free to send those through the Q&A box to Alva Donis. So Jacqueline, as we look at the long array of the 25 indicators, what was it that prompted you in working with the Select 5 now that prompted you to develop a subset? So basically, what I want to get at is what are these 5 indicators, and why did you feel that they were a good way to go as opposed to the full range of 25?
Absolutely. So I just, flip to the slide on the 5 indicators, and I think you'll see this was really what we honed in on as the most important, the critical indicators. When we first released the full framework of the 25 indicators, we received an enormous amount of positive feedback. For an industry that's always been focused on women, there was really an understanding that we really lacked a way to understand gender, and there was a really positive reaction from all stakeholders about these indicators as a tool. But there was also some concern. There are so many reporting requirements out there from investors, donors, raters, even from the mix. Was it really possible to ask MFIs to report on another 25 indicators? We heard it was just too many. So what we wanted to do was really identify what we initially called the Select Few, and eventually became the Select 5 because we identified 5. And then these would be the key indicators, the most informative, but also the most feasible to collect and report on for the majority of institutions. And that we envision that these indicators would then become the minimum that everyone would adapt and would be the gateway to adapting more of the fuller set of indicators.
Great. Now, in developing these, you partnered with Mix. And what made you reach out to Mix as a likely candidate to work with on this?
Absolutely. We wanted a partner in this process, an organization that not only knew data, but really understood what the industry standard was for robust indicators. Of course, the Mix is really the industry data hub. They've worked with thousands of MFIs on reporting into various stakeholders, and it really was the perfect partner for us to test our assumptions about these indicators with a larger audience and really get useful feedback on whether what we were asking was reasonable sustainable and was helpful in institutions in managing their gender performance.
Great. And so with that, maybe I'll transition here and reach out to Mike. So Mike, when you were working with the GPIs, what was the steps that you helped take, and what was Mix able to do to get from the full range of 25 down to the select 5 in the way that Women's World Banking was hoping to achieve?
Yeah, so great question. Actually, you know, when Women's World Banking approached us, they had already done a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to selection. They came to us with 8 indicators, so they'd already pared down the range from 25 to 8, and they came to us. And you know they selected those 8 indicators based on, as we say in the paper that we wrote together, the degree of difficulty for institutions to report on them, the comparability of the indicators across institutions and markets, and then whether there was a strong indication that they reflected better service for women or contributed to the business case for serving women. Where we became involved was really at the testing level, and then again at the analysis level. So they came to us with these indicators. We selected the MFIs. For the survey, we collected responses, we followed up with the MFIs, et cetera, and then we performed a lot of the analysis and helped write the report. But, so in terms of actually selecting these indicators, it was really sort of at the last stages that we had a hand.
Great. And so from Mix's perspective, with the Gender Performance Initiative work, what drew Mix towards that partnership?
So first of all, Mix has a strong working relationship with Women's World Banking, and we have for a long time. The social performance team in particular has had really great experiences working with them in the past. And second, it was a pretty natural fit for us. As Jacqueline was saying, we've got the data, we've got the communication channels, and we've got the analytic capacity. So, those 2 facts alone. The fact that it was a natural fit and that it was Women's World Banking who was asking, that probably would have been enough to get us on board right there. But we were also very, it's a topic that is very interesting to us, especially for the social performance team. And you've got measuring social outcomes for women while building a case for focusing on them, and on the one hand, and then implementing and analyzing new social indicators with a view towards sort of the practical and what works on the other. It was almost like they designed the project with us in mind from the beginning.
Sounds like a match pretty well made.
Yes, yes.
When you were working with the indicators, we did actually get a question here that relates to one that we had planned to ask you. And so let me ask that first. How did you test the indicators to come up with the select 5?
So what we did was we started with a very large list of MFIs, somewhere around, I think, 300 that we had, selected based on various criteria. Then we grouped those into 2 large buckets that were sort of based on various things that they had reported to us in the past. We labeled them as either women-focused or not women-focused. And then we pared down that list a bit more based on the institution's ability to report certain indicators in the past, a couple of other internal criteria. For example, if we'd already hit them with 6 or 7 data requests in the previous month, so we didn't want to send them another email, that sort of thing. And then once we had our different groups, we sent them the surveys asking them to report on the 8 indicators themselves, or actually, in some cases, the inputs to the indicators, since some of them are calculated. And then a couple of questions around each indicator on the ease and the usefulness of collection, the ease and the usefulness of in their opinion, so their perceptions on those. And then, we collected the answers and started the analysis. And the analysis basically was looking for a couple things. It was looking for, did data from the indicators show evidence of different behavior from women clients as opposed to other client segments? And did MFIs think those indicators were relatively easy to collect and useful? And sort of when we combined those 3 criteria, the indicators that made the cut became the select 5.
That's great. And so there's a couple of questions we've had from the audience that I'll ask now because they relate a lot, I think, to the development of the Select 5. One of those had to do with, from the perspective of the clients themselves, of women clients, how do they respond to the GPIs? Is there any interaction there, or is it all strictly kind of on the institutional side?
You know, that I think probably Shahina's, I don't mean to deflect, but I think Shahina's might actually be a better person to ask that, because we at Mix, unfortunately, don't have that much interaction with clients. It's more at the institutional level that we really do stuff. So I can tell you that, you know, we had a lot of response from institutions, but I really don't know. I can't really speak to the relationship between the institution and the client so much.
And that's okay, and certainly Mix's expertise here is a lot with gathering the data from the institutional level. Mm-hmm. So what we could do is, Shahina, as we turn to you sort of in the latter part of the discussion here, we'll come back to that question. One that I wanted to go back to Jacqueline about, though, we also got from the audience, actually considering cultural barriers or differentiation in the way that women interact with society in different cultures. Was that accounted for anywhere within the overall 25 or the select 5?
Absolutely. I think more in the overall 25. With the select 5, we really wanted to boil it down to the ones that we felt any institution, irregardless of cultural or market context, could report on. But in the 25, the larger framework, we definitely wanted to get some further nuance on women clients and how you could gain an understanding in different contexts. And one example is our indicator on what we called self-determination. This was trying to get to the heart of whether women were in fact the ones using the loans that they received. And this is an issue in certain regions where there's this idea that loans may be being passed through women and being used by the males in their family or even outside their family. And so this was one of our indicators where we really want to take into consideration what we've been hearing from different regions, still making it an indicator that could be used globally, but really taking that into consideration.
Great, great. Now, this could either be for you, Mike, or Jacqueline. One other question we'll take from the audience and then move on is, with the 25 or the 5, do either of those help you identify which women are being asked? And here, I guess it's really a question of targeting, as opposed to just all of your women clients, or are the indicators sometimes applied to a sample set?
Mike, do you want me to take a stab at that?
Yeah, you want to go for it?
Sure. We definitely incorporated that. I mean, we really didn't want to dictate who an institution should be targeting. So the understanding was that these indicators are meant for institutions that both explicitly target women and specifically low-income women, of course, but also those that don't. So we didn't want to say whether or not they should be targeting certain segments, but we definitely did include indicators to get to the depth of outreach. So not only are you reaching women, but are you reaching low-income women? And we used a few ways to get at that. One was, the standard industry proxy around average loan size. While not a perfect measure, certainly can start to get at whether these women clients are in fact lower income. And we also actually incorporated one which was average initial loan size, with this idea of where a woman starts, even if she grows with the institution over time. That first loan size can be one indicator of her income levels. And then, of course, also using poverty metrics where appropriate. But really, in terms of, also looking at the larger market, we also encourage through the indicators to look at market share and market penetration for the women's market. And this also gets to a targeting element in the fact that how you define your target market. So, for example, if you say, I want to look at all self-employed women micro-entrepreneurs in my market, and then target that, that's what you would use as your baseline for market share. So it really helps you to hone in on that.
So you could really make some management level decisions about your practices there based on some of this data, particularly when combined with some industry proxies that way. That's pretty powerful. That's our hope. Great. Mike, turning back to you, with the findings that you got in the initial testing and so forth of the indicators, were there some of the findings that particularly stuck out to Mix that you want to share today?
Yeah. So I think at the most general level, and I hope this doesn't sound trite, but what I actually find most interesting that the project is really a success from our standpoint. I mean, first of all, the indicators do show, even in our relatively small sample that we used for the analysis that we performed, our indicators do show that women clients, exhibit significantly different behavior than both male clients and clients in general. And for example, they tend to have, in our sample, they tended to have smaller average loan balances and higher rates of retention. So, that finding in itself isn't new per se, but the combination of it with the ease and the straightforwardness of the Select 5 mean that it's really possible to fine-tune a strategy, a financial inclusion strategy for the needs of women that goes far beyond just targeting them and extending credit. And that, in turn, I think really, the ability to demonstrate those differences with such a small number of indicators really, and of indicators that are by the testament of MFIs, relatively straightforward to collect, really validates the entire object of the Select 5, or the Select Few as it was originally called, initiative. Beyond that, I think in terms of particular findings, one that I found really interesting, and this wasn't necessarily a finding based on the new indicators that Women's World Banking had created, but we found that actually the MFIs that were classified as women-focused within our sample group had lower rates of staff diversity than the women-neutral ones. We couldn't, that's sort of a puzzle right there, and we couldn't really find any satisfactory explanations within the data that we've been collecting. But I think, my personal take on it is that it reveals the need for maybe a bit more soul searching in the sector on what we really mean by empowering women. How can we claim to empower women if we're not empowering them in our institutions, that sort of thing. So that for me was a really powerful finding, even though it was maybe based on an older, more established indicator. Staying with the women thing, the women staff thing, I mean, another a very interesting finding from my perspective was that there was a real diversity among female versus male staff turnover. So in our sample, sometimes women staff members were retained much longer than their male counterparts, while other times they weren't retained nearly as long. And sometimes there was really no difference. So does that mean that there's no relation between staff turnover and gender? Does it mean there's some hidden factor? I don't know. I'd love to dig a little deeper. Especially given the last finding that implies that women-focused MFIs might be paying less attention to the degree of to their staff diversity than maybe they should.
That's great, and I think what's really interesting to me as a listener here, and as much a learner I think as anyone on the webinar today, is that putting next to what Jacqueline was talking about, which is how this data can be used to drive almost external decision making about how the institution operates. What you're talking about, Mike, here has a lot to do with some implications perhaps for internal decision making and how the institution goes about structuring itself operationally.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's an element of empowering women that we maybe tend to breeze over, which is that maybe the best way to empower women is to do it from the inside out and to put women at the helm of the entire enterprise.
That's great, and I think that's a really marked example of how you can utilize data to really bridge the span between kind of just raw data and then analyze it in ways that help you bridge divides and meet the needs of your particular women client. That's great. So at this point, actually, I want to go back to something you said, Mike, about the sort of the ease of analyzing the data. And so at this point, I want to open up our second poll question, which actually focuses on this precisely. And so we'll go ahead and open that now. The poll question reads like this. Check which among those presented, there's 5 options there, look like to you, in your experience, are easy to begin tracking. And you can select any number of those. If you think all 5 are easy, that's great. If you think only 1 is easy, that's great. Let us know what you think, and we'll let that go for about a minute here. my colleague here pointed out that actually we can only choose one on our options list here. So actually we'll have the question be, which do you think is easiest? We're almost to about half of the attendees here sending in their response. We'll give it just a few more seconds. All right, and we're closing that out, and now we'll share those results out. So it looks like a lot of you have selected that percent of new women borrowers may be the easiest among the select 5 to measure. So that's a very interesting set of responses. And Jacqueline, I don't know if you wanted to take a moment to just comment on that. Is that something that you see frequently?
No, I think that's something really interesting, and beyond even the fact that new women borrowers came up as the most, what I'm actually thrilled to see is that women borrower retention rate was also positively ranked. And I think that's something that is, in our minds, a very simple thing to calculate. It actually comes from percent new women borrowers, so once you have that, you can calculate your women borrower retention rate. And it actually can yield incredible insight when you disaggregate your retention. And it's not something that a lot of people are doing yet, so I hope that can start to encourage all the institutions on this call to do so.
Great, thanks. So at this point, I want to turn now to Shahinaz. Shahinaz, with your work kind of as a direct implementer and someone who may be using these indicators on a daily basis, how do these indicators translate into your organization's relationship with your clients?
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank all those who contributed to make this event, participants and audience. And now, talking about MicroFund for Women in these numbers, the slide of our numbers. Our name is MicroFund for Women. You know that, of course. Our slogan, MFW, promote for women. Our borrowers, the majority from women, even the majority from our staff, our employers are female. Let me say this note, for funding men in our organization, the first guarantee for him must be a woman from his relative, and that for empowerment and make empowerment for our women in our society, even if she doesn't work outside her house. We have in our organization many products are promoting only for women, like solidarity groups and support with seasonal loans for those who need seasonally. Even we have a maternity loan only for our ladies if she is from our clients or from outside, just to take care about her health and her kids' health when she began pregnant. We have a lot of stories to tell how we are make it in our MicroFund for Women. Because not only our name, but we are searching about the needs of our women in our society.
Great. So with that, when you learned about the gender performance indicators and given your organization's mission, what were some of your hopes for how you might utilize the information you can gather using these GPIs?
We have a huge system in our organization. We can take many reports clearly about the difference or between the genders. sorry, your question it didn't make clear to me because your voice come and go. Can you return it, please?
I certainly can, yes. When you learned about the gender performance indicators and looking at MicroFund for Women's overall mission, what was some of the information that you hoped to be able to utilize that you can gather using the GPIs?
Before that, when we began to learn or search about gender, that's because if we can answer this question, let me say something about statistics. Why women and why women? Why international or local or governmental organizations and institutions serving women and searching about their needs, or seeking to learn the most important gender statistics relating to women's needs. The goal for that, everyone knows or maybe believes the economic, educational, health, or legal improvement positively affects the families, which ensures to be betterment of society and state. That's why we began to learn or search about the women's needs and to take these indicators in our organization.
Very good. So with that, I wanted to ask you then, what are some of the gender performance indicators that MFW uses right now?
Again, your voice come and go. I don't know what's about the net here.
That's okay. What are some of the indicators that MFW is currently using?
Oh, what about? What kind of?
What kind of indicators?
We are tracking some reports about the new borrowers for women and the retention rate, repayment for them, and the loan size average. Many indicators about that we can make it in our report for learning in that issues.
Great, so a good variety there. I wanted to ask one of our audience questions. When you use these indicators, Shahinaz, are you using them on only clients who receive credit, or are you using them to assess clients regardless of what kind of financial product they're receiving?
We use it, if I understand your question clearly, both, because we use it to know the new clients or the renew clients in our organization for that.
Great. So it looks like the indicators can be used for a variety of different types of clients.
Yes.
A related question, and perhaps Jacqueline, maybe you might jump in too, is in talking about some of the indicators important to an institution regarding their social outcomes. Do you look beyond the individual, for example, to employment generation or normative change, as well as sort of also looking at intergenerational outcomes, second generation effect, and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I can weigh in. And I also had one comment on the earlier question to Shahinaz's remarks on the variety of products. So, MicroFund for Women does do it for all their clients. They offer insurance as well as credit. But we also see these indicators as being used, of course, for institutions that accept deposits as well. And what you'll see in the overall framework is that the current indicators tend to be more credit focused. They're not all around credit, but they tend to start there. But what I will say is that actually we're in a second phase of the initiative, and we're actually currently testing specific savings indicators for gender. So that's definitely something we want to continue to build on. Of course, the next phase would be around insurance as well, but really making sure that we have specific indicators for the full product offering.
Great. So working to build that out. Wonderful.
Absolutely. And then to your question on the social outcomes, we really focused on what we considered outcomes for women. So we didn't look as much on the employment generation effects or the kind of larger economic implications. But to your point on intergenerational change, that was something that really came across to us. Whenever we spoke to women globally through our other types of research, we've heard that most important to women is that their children are in school and are healthy. And so, children's education was an indicator we did include in the full framework. It's difficult. It's not easy for every institution to track that type of data, but we did work with one partner in India, Ujjivan, who was tracking education levels of all their clients' children. And this, when tracked over time, does start to show some outcome data, which is really interesting. And so we put this as a difficult indicator, but an aspirational one that we hope we can all start to work towards, because I think intergenerational change is something we all want to start to understand better.
Thanks. So at this point, actually, we're going to turn back to our poll for a third question right before we go back to you, Shahinaz. Our poll question, this last one, it just opened, is whether or not you think women staff stay with your institution longer than, say, your male staff. And we'll give that about a minute for folks to respond. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and close down the poll. We'll start that process now. Okay, and we'll share that out. My question here, actually, Shahinaz, as you're looking at this, it looks like most people think either, yes, their women staff do stay longer than their men, or they're not sure. In the experience of MicroFund for Women, what do you think is the right answer there, Shahinaz? Do you see that your women's staff stay longer than your men's staff do? Oh, it looks like actually we may have lost Shahinaz's connection. So as we get her back, maybe we'll turn to you, Jacqueline.
Sure. What we've seen is that it really depends on the institution, so I wouldn't make a sweeping statement, but what we have seen is that a lot of people answer based on assumptions and not based on data. So we have a tool called an organizational gender assessment tool, where we go into a partner institution and actually look at all their diversity policies and metrics. And when we interview stakeholders throughout the organization, we often hear this idea that staff are more likely to leave the institution when they get married or when they have children or because of other responsibilities, and that's why they don't, they aren't promoted up through the organization into leadership positions. But when we look at the data, what we very often find is that it's either there's no difference or women are actually staying longer, either because they're more loyal to the institution or because they don't move as much, so they're more likely to want to stay in their current positions. But whatever the case, it's really about using the data to test these assumptions that many of us hold and don't even realize are not based on factor data.
That's great. And actually, we have another question from the audience here, and either Mike or Jacqueline, you may have some information around this. in looking at sort of the question we're asking here about women retention rate, what is it that makes that an indicator useful for understanding how well you're serving your women clients?
I mean, I can start. I don't know if Mike wants to also weigh in. I mean, if we're talking about the borrower retention rate, you know, obviously that's a much smaller metric because it looks at credit specifically. Although in our framework, we also include an indicator that looks at looking at every client by how many years they've been a client of the institution by gender. So that's an alternative way to look beyond just credit, but to look at how long your clients are staying with the institution. And we completely acknowledge that that's not a perfect measure, that, you know, clients stay with an institution for a variety of reasons, not necessarily because the services are meeting their needs, but we hope it can be one way to measure whether, in fact, those products are meeting the needs. And then when paired with other indicators like product uptake, like the number of inquiries or complaints that come in, you can start to get a fuller picture of service quality and whether, in fact, you are meeting your client needs.
I would just add to that also that one of the things that's really important about that indicator is that it moves. We've seen that it moves differently than you know, total client total borrower retention, and so, you know, monitoring it and monitoring it independently, and especially watching out for changes and seeing and actually just evaluating at what level it is relative to your total client retention rate is very important if you're going to focus on women, because it really does appear to exhibit different behavior. Also, within, you know, one of the inputs for women borrower retention rate is new women borrowers, and that in itself is also an interesting indicator to follow. And so, you know, the two can kind of go hand in hand, because new women borrowers, that will tell you, you know, in which direction. That gives you a good idea of the trajectory of your institution. Is that number growing? Is it shrinking relative to your total client borrower base, et cetera?
Great. Okay. So it sounds like this is an interesting data point, and a lot of questions have come in around sort of the connection between staff retention and how well you're serving your women clients. Another one sort of related to that is looking at the women empowerment. And we had one question about if the target is women empowerment, is there a simple indicator within the select 5 that focus on, say, for instance, is the percent of women in group leadership if you're doing group lending, talking about starting with credit models? And does that monitor what extent the local community is perhaps changing attitudes? And this gets at some of the normative change we heard a question about earlier.
So from my perspective, the Select 5 especially are not truly getting to this question of empowerment. And quite honestly, we did a lot to get to that in the full framework, but it's not fully there yet either. And we actually explored a huge number of indicators to get down to the 25, well over 100 to start. And many of them actually revolved around some of those very questions you brought up. So for example, are women participating in community leadership positions, or even are they voting where it's applicable? Or, you know, when we look at empowerment, we could talk about, you know, even movement. Are they moving without, you know, outside their village or outside their comfort level or the area where they're used to moving around? And this was very difficult to capture in data. And one of the things we came out with at the end was that these indicators, and especially the fuller framework of indicators, are the first step. But you really do need to support this with other types of research to understand the empowerment question. At Women's World Banking, we conduct focus groups, and we're looking at to do outcome surveys that will really get to the heart of this. But the indicators themselves are really built off data that can be collected consistently by an institution, and we didn't feel like there was one data point that could really empowerment in a comprehensive way.
Great. And so talking about kind of use of the data there, Jacqueline, we did have another question from a little while back that I want to ask now. Over time, as the indicators are more implemented, or implemented more widely, I should say, do you plan to conduct predictive analysis being able to use these indicators?
That's a great question. That's actually not something we considered before. I would love to get to that point. I would say an even closer next step would be, I would love to start to benchmark some of these indicators. You know, right now we're saying just track this information, but we're not yet saying what is good and what is bad performance on each of these metrics. And, you know, I fully expect that there will be regional differences and differences by the type of institution that report, but I would hope that as we get more and more institutions reporting this information, we could actually start to see what the results are and what institutions that we know are performing well when it comes to serving women, what their numbers look like, so we can then start to benchmark what is good gender performance. I would say then the step after that would be to say, is there any way to do predictive analysis to say if you were to achieve this level of women borrower retention, then you will achieve these returns, if you will, for serving women well.
Right, and I would add also there's sort of an intermediate step there, which is just the correlation step, which would be great to know also. And as we get more more data coming in on these indicators, we can start to look at that too. Just, you know, which indicators are strongly associated with which other ones, and then that will give us the platform upon which to start to really look at the predictive side of things.
Great. And Mike, I may start with you, though. You may feel like adding Jacqueline in on this question would be good, too. We had a question that would be interesting to know whether the gender of the loan officer who is facing the client has any impact on retention of female versus male clients. Is that looked at?
You know, I saw that question, too, and I wrote it down because I think that is an excellent research question. We definitely don't have any. I don't have any answers I could give to you on that. The real obstacle to answering that question right now would be simply that we don't have very many MFIs reporting on new women borrowers. So, you know, we have the rest of the inputs, but once we get some more information on new women borrowers, we could answer that question. And I think that it's a great thing to look at.
Great. And so good. We have Shahina's back. Shahina, can you hear us? We'll continue working with her to make sure that her audio comes online. But while we're waiting for her audio to connect, I had one other sort of data kind of question, which, you know, I'm asking a lot of these, but I think they're important to financial institutions that are on the call to know how they're able to use this data and in what ways they can deploy that. One of the ones that we had is, when you're looking at the average loan size, how consistent is that? And does it reflect changes in the lives of women borrowers? And actually, being a statistical question, maybe, Mike, you'd be able to shed some light on how powerful that is.
Wow. You know, I think I don't really. Yeah, I don't think there is just one answer to that question. I think it's just too varied. You know, sometimes you see a certain size of a certain average loan size because an MFI only has a couple products. Other times you see it because it really is, you know, reflective of the needs of the client base. And I think, you know, that's a question that is sort of less helpful the more aggregate you go and the higher up you look at it from. And it's really a very useful question and at the institutional level, but I don't know that we can really make that broad of a generalization about it.
Yeah, and I would add that it also, you know, it's really just the first step. I mean, if you're an institution and you're looking and you're seeing that you have a difference in average loan size for your women and men, there's a lot of follow-up questions that come out of that. And some of those are addressed through other indicators, like looking at the income or asset levels of your women versus men, because in theory, you should see a correlation between the income or asset level of your client and the loan size that they're given. And do those actually match up when you look at women versus men? But even further questions, you know, are we giving smaller loans to women because of ingrained assumptions by loan officers, or is it actually based on a cash flow analysis? You know, there's so many questions that follow from it. We really see these indicators, especially the Select 5, as just the very first step. And then there's other metrics that you would use to gain further information, and then there's qualitative research that would provide even a fuller picture.
Great. That's very, and so again, back to the kind of, this is a development process, and so that's good. And I'm glad we're getting some of these tough questions. For those on the call, we were talking together as a group, and we were hoping for some questions that would really stump some of the panelists. So I'm glad you're asking those. Please keep the challenging questions coming. Another one that we had, and this may be more in the process of testing the indicators and evaluating their strength. In the process of testing the indicators and their validity, was there a feedback process where you also gathered information directly from the women clients whom the indicators are assessing? And that could actually be anywhere from the initial development process, Jacqueline, within WWB, or on out to when you partnered with MIX.
So we did, as part of the very first pilots, when we developed the full framework of the 25 indicators, we started with 3 of our network member institutions, and we went there, we talked with people at all levels of the organization, and we also talked with women clients. And from that perspective, we really wanted to understand what they were currently being asked, if you will, so as part of either a loan application or account opening form, and, you know, also in terms of feedback mechanisms, because a lot of what we talked about in these indicators is about assessing needs and really designing products to meet those needs. And so we really wanted to understand what women clients were being asked, what their feelings were on that, and, you know, is there an opportunity to get more information? Because these indicators really start from a place of the data that a financial institution would collect as part of its normal operations. We didn't go out to them, for example, as a separate survey and ask them these specific indicators. So I can't say that they reacted to one versus another, but it was really just about gaining more information on their comfort level on sharing information with their financial institution.
Okay. So from here, I wanted to note we're about 3 minutes before time. For those who are listening in, we seem to be having a very energetic conversation here, lots of questions coming in. Please keep them coming. I've talked with the speakers beforehand, and we've agreed that at this point, if you'd like, we can continue going for another about 10 or 15 minutes here to take a few more questions and really keep this lively discussion going. At that point, we'll close out. So if you'd like to stay on, we'll keep going. One of the questions I'd like to keep going with is when you're tracking the progress of women borrowers, is there sort of, and this may get into a longitudinal kind of question, is there a way to understand are women clients doing better over time, say perhaps in the phrasing of this question, graduating to larger loans or into SME borrowers?
From my perspective, that is the most interesting question, and it's something that we weren't able to do as part of our pilots. Quite frankly, you know, there are resource constraints around every project, but it's something that we actually are looking to fundraise for now, because we think that now that we've collected this data from more and more institutions, the real question is about how these indicators change over time. You know, and for the Select 5, for example, that's something that we believe every institution can and should report year on year. When you look at the fuller framework of data and really looking at those financial and social outcomes, this is where it gets difficult to track the data over time, but could potentially yield the most interesting results. And one example that comes to mind is that our partner in India that we tested these indicators with, they collect data as part of their loan application form for the PPI, for the Progress Out of Poverty Index. So they're collecting a lot of data on the lives of these clients, and they're collecting it every loan cycle, so conceivably every year. But the data was archived, and so, you know, the process of getting that data out of archive to compare it year on year was a bit of a more arduous process for the institution. But what we hope is that with some support, we could get that data, analyze it, and use it to show other institutions the value of keeping that data and comparing it year on year to demonstrate outcomes for clients.
Great. Mike, anything to add on the longitudinal side from an analysis perspective? How valuable would that be? What can be done? And is there a certain level of aggregation that's necessary to make that kind of statistically powerful?
Well, I mean, to be honest, we have not been able to look very much at longitudinal social indicators simply because MFIs find them very difficult to collect and report to us. It would certainly be great if more MFIs could start, for example, implementing the PPIs, the actual progress out of poverty aspect of that. I have seen, I've visited with some MFIs and I've seen MISs that are capable of tracking that sort of thing. I know, there are some really great methodologies out there, but in terms of its use and analysis, to be honest, we've never really gotten that far because we don't. The data is just not there from our perspective at the moment.
Okay. Okay, so there could be some opportunities perhaps in the future for doing some combination of indicators. At this point, we're still working to connect Shahinaz's audio, but wanting to bring back some of the example of our on-the-ground expert there. Jacqueline, perhaps since you're very familiar with some of the work that's going on at MFW, I thought maybe you might comment on what might be some of the more interesting findings that, or interesting ways that they've used data that's been gathered using the gender performance indicators. And what has Shahina shared with you about that?
Absolutely, and I've had the pleasure. Oh, Shahina is also on the participant, and she can also write some points. So I'll share what she's shared with me in the past, but Shahina, if you also want to write some answers, we can also read them out. So, in my experience with MFW, I mean, as a women-focused organization, and quite frankly, as a women-majority organization, they serve, I believe it's 96% women borrowers. So a lot of the gender disaggregated data, at first glance might not be as useful for them. But what I find really interesting and what we've discussed is that, MFW has submitted data to us showing, what percentage of the portfolio women hold versus what % of borrowers they make up. And what becomes clear from that is that women, even at MFW that's so women-focused, are in fact getting smaller loans. So for us to discuss, for MFW to really dig deeper and understand why that is it because the women are just requiring smaller loans, that their businesses don't need as much capital? These are the type of questions that, when we get that type of data from MFW, we then go back to them with, and they start to reflect and adapt their products and do trainings with their loan officers to better understand the factors that are feeding into this. And then the other thing we discussed was on the staff side, because MFW has such a commitment to women staff and women leaders within the organization, is really looking at those retention rates of staff, the promotion rates of staff, and really looking at diversity at every level. And that's something that MFW has always been incredibly strong on and incredibly committed to, and making sure that not only are they fostering a workplace that is conducive to women staff and leaders, but that they're actually investing in those women to grow with the organization. And I think you see that with their retention rates.
Very good. So at this point, we've kind of slowed down on some of the questions, and I thought maybe we could try, Jacqueline, to bring it back together. What do we want to see come out of today, and what lies ahead for Women's World Banking with the indicators? You mentioned kind of 2 future phases, and I thought you might comment on that.
Absolutely. My main takeaway from all the questions that have come in is I'm very excited about the opportunity to continue to build on this work. What I'm hearing is that we need more. And that to me is the best answer we could get, because our initial thought was, are we asking too much? Are we pushing these indicators out, and is it needed? And what I'm hearing from the participants and from those that have started to use these indicators is that these are great. These will yield incredible insight both from a business perspective as well as meeting your social mission, but we need more. We need to understand empowerment. We need to understand how other products are impacting our women clients. It needs to be more than credit. It needs to go on a bigger scale to intergenerational change and to other indicators of social outcomes. And to me, that's very exciting, and it's exactly where we as Women's World Banking want to head, as I said, pilot savings indicators and hopefully indicators around other products in the future, as we hopefully start to work with other stakeholders to incorporate these indicators. So for example, we're in conversations with rating agencies and donors to really make sure that these indicators are part of their reporting requirements, so it's not something additional, but really becomes part of the industry conversation. And so for us, I think the more we do that, the more we can kind of invest in looking to these new areas, and I'm really excited about that.
Terrific. I think there's a lot to look forward to there, and some conversations to be had in the future. And I do hope we, as the Microcredit Summit campaign, can work with Women's World Banking going forward to help continue the conversation around what are the best ways to use these indicators and really help support your efforts in generating greater understanding on how they can be used, how they can drive decision making. Michael, any closing comments regarding MICS and the future of MICS working with Women's World Banking on the GPIs?
Well, just that I guess, you know, I think as far as the GPIs go, something that and especially the Select 5, something that I really like about them, and I think if participants took one, or you know, attendees took one thing away from my part of this conversation, it would be that, you know, these are they provide a great beginning and a great place to start to make your focus on women clients and on serving women more robust, and to do that in a financially sustainable way. You know, there's a lot of indicators. I think, you know, one criticism of the sector and in general is that we collect a lot of things simply to report them, and I think these are great examples of indicators that are not at all like that. You can do a lot with them, and really for me the litmus test of a good indicator is whether or not it prompts a question and whether or not it gives you something to work with and to move further with. And I think these are exactly that type of indicator. And you know, there's not just the Select 5 either. There's this entire body of indicators that Women's World Banking has created, and I think, you know, we really look forward to helping Women's World Banking to collect those indicators through our partnership with them, and also to continue analyzing them and try to generate more insights about serving women.
That's great. Thank you very much to both of you for being on. Thank you, Shahinaz, who is still here, but unfortunately we were unable to bring your audio back in time for the latter part of the discussion. We're very grateful for the time difference that you endured in order to connect with us today. I will say that we're going to, at this point, close out, but we didn't get to all of your questions. So what we're going to do, we've recorded the webinar. We'll be placing it online at 100millionideas.org. That's the Microcredit Summit Campaign's blog. We'll have there also a list of some of the questions perhaps we didn't get to, and we encourage you to continue the discussion through our chat module there on the blog as a way to be able to ask additional follow-up questions. The great thing about that will be that we can also help send those questions on to Shahinaz. So if you had questions for someone who's actually in the process of utilizing the indicators right here and now, we can help make sure that we can shed some light on that perspective. A couple of things I wanted to mention. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today and helping to shed a lot of light on what looks like it can be a really powerful data tool. We encourage you who are on with us today to reach out to Women's World Banking or the Microcredit Summit campaign about the Women's World Banking commitment, the MICS campaign commitment, or if you'd like to make your own commitment. We'd be happy to begin talking with you about that. To begin, write to us at mycommitment@microcreditsummit.org, or you can go online to make a campaign commitment using a link that we're showing there on the screen. We hope that you'll join Women's World Banking and organizations like MICS in their efforts to take one specific step forward each time that they make a commitment towards the end of poverty. We encourage everyone to join us again in early December for our next e-workshop. That'll be on savings groups. So those of you who had a lot of savings questions today may be interested in that. We'll be co-hosting that with the Carsey School from the University of New Hampshire, and also featuring Fundación Capital based out of Colombia. And we look forward to sharing more details on that very soon. We thank everyone, and again, please visit our blog for a recording of the webinar today, as well as follow-up discussion. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.